Marcus's 18th birthday arrived without ceremony. Just another gray winter morning in a quiet American suburb where the snow piled up along the sidewalks and no one bothered to shovel until noon. There was no cake on the kitchen counter, no card, no balloons taped awkwardly to the wall. Instead, there was a worn duffel bag by the front door. Mrs. Hartwell stood by the sink, arms folded, her expression tight and distant. The coffee maker gurgled behind her, filling the silence that neither of them seemed willing to break. "The check stopped," she said finally, not looking at him. "We can't keep doing this." Marcus nodded slowly like he'd been expecting it, even if he hadn't wanted to. Across the room, Mr. Brennan leaned against the doorway, his face lined with something heavier than anger. Guilt maybe, or exhaustion. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. On the kitchen table sat a stack of unpaid medical bills. From down the hall came the faint, uneven cough of their son. Marcus noticed all of it. He always did, and that made it worse because it meant he understood. He understood that things had changed, that whatever version of family they once tried to be had quietly eroded under pressure. Money, stress, reality. Still, understanding didn't make it hurt any less. "I can stay a couple more days," Mr. Brennan muttered, almost to himself. "No," Mrs. Hartwell cut in, sharper this time. "We've talked about this." That was it, decision made. Marcus picked up the duffel bag. It felt lighter than it should have, like it barely held anything at all. Just a few clothes, $121 in cash, and the weight of being unwanted. His fingers slipped into his jacket pocket, brushing against the small, worn copper token his grandfather had left him. Scrap metal, Mrs. Hartwell had once called it. Marcus tightened his grip around it. Anyway, he stepped outside. The cold hit him instantly, sharp and unforgiving. Behind him, the door shut with a quiet, final click. No one called his name. And for the first time in his life, Marcus realized something with absolute clarity. He wasn't leaving home. He just didn't have one anymore. Marcus wasn't wandering aimlessly. Even as the cold stung his face and the snow soaked through his worn sneakers, he already knew where he was going. North. Out past the last gas station, past the quiet neighborhoods, past the point where street lights stopped pretending to keep people safe. Into the stretch of forest most locals avoided. The kind of place people only talked about when they were telling stories they didn't fully believe. That's where his grandfather had lived, and that's where the railway carriage was. He hadn't thought about it in years. Not really. But now, every step seemed guided by something buried deep in his memory. His grandfather, Edmund, used to talk about that place in a way that never quite made sense. "If you ever run out of places to go," he'd said once, his voice steady but distant, "go there. It won't lie to you." It sounded like one of those strange, half-serious things older people said when they didn't want to explain themselves. Now it was the only direction he had. The memory of the day everything changed came back sharper than he expected. His grandfather had been sitting in that old recliner, the one that creaked every time he shifted. He looked smaller than usual, fragile, like time had finally caught up. "I can't raise you the way you deserve," he'd admitted, his tone calm but heavy. "But I can find you a place that's stable." That place had been the Hartwell and Brennan household. Back then they weren't like they were now. They had a steady income, a quiet home, the kind of normal life that looked safe from the outside, and they'd agreed to take Marcus in. Maybe for the money, maybe not entirely. His grandfather had known it wasn't perfect. Marcus could see that now, but it had been the best option a tired old man had left. Before Marcus left that day, Edmund had pressed the worn copper token into his palm. "Some things don't look like much," he'd said, meeting Marcus's eyes, "but they're the only things that stay real." The forest thickened as Marcus walked. Snow clung to the branches, heavy and silent. The air felt different out here. Colder, yes, but also quieter, like the world had stepped back and left this place alone. His legs ached, His fingers were numb. More than once he thought about turning back. There had to be somewhere easier, a shelter, a bus station, somewhere with heat. But every time the thought came, something in him pushed it away, because easier had never really worked out for him before. Then he saw it. The railway carriage. It sat off to the side of a forgotten track, rusted and weather-beaten, half buried in snow like it had been left behind by time itself. It didn't look like shelter. It didn't look safe. It looked honest. The wind pushed through the broken seams, making the metal groan in long, uneven creaks. The sound echoed through the trees, low and unsettling. Marcus stopped a few feet away, staring. This was it. This was what his grandfather had left him. Not comfort, not security, just truth. Inside, it was worse than he expected. The air bit at his skin. The floor was freezing steel. Every gap in the walls let the cold slip in like it belonged there. Marcus dropped his bag and tried to get a fire going. Nothing. He tried again, still nothing. The lighter flickered weakly, then died. He let out a slow breath, his shoulders tightening. "This isn't going to work," he muttered under his breath. For a moment the thought felt solid, real. He could leave. He could walk back before it got worse. Find somewhere else, somewhere warmer, safer, easier. Marcus stood there, staring out into the darkening forest. Then his hand moved, almost without thinking, into his pocket, the copper token, cold, worn, familiar. He turned it over in his fingers, his jaw tightening. This was all he had left of someone who hadn't given up on him. And this place, whether he liked it or not, was the only thing that person had left behind. Marcus exhaled slowly. Then he sat back down on the freezing floor. Not because he believed it would get better, but because for the first time, walking away felt worse than staying. By the third night, the cold wasn't just uncomfortable. It was relentless. It got into everything. Marcus could feel it in his bones, in his fingertips, in the way his breath came out sharp and uneven. Sleep came in short, restless bursts, never enough to feel human again. The railway carriage groaned under the weight of the wind. Metal scraped. Wood creaked. It sounded like the whole thing might give out at any second. Then the storm hit. Not gradual, not gentle. It slammed into the forest like it had something to prove. Snow came sideways, thick and blinding. The wind howled through every crack in the carriage, forcing its way inside like it owned the place. Within minutes, the temperature dropped even further, and the thin layer of warmth Marcus had managed to hold on to vanished. Then came the dripping. At first it was just one spot, a slow, steady tap, then another and another. Water from melting snow seeped through the damaged roof, falling onto the steel floor in icy drops that spread fast. "Great," Marcus muttered, his voice tight with frustration. He grabbed what little he had, scraps of wood, a broken panel, anything, and tried to patch it. But everything felt temporary, useless. The storm didn't care how hard he tried. His hands shook, not just from the cold, but from something else creeping in: doubt. This wasn't survival. This was barely hanging on. "What am I even doing here?" he said out loud, the words sounding hollow in the empty space. For the first time since he arrived, the thought didn't just pass through his mind. It stayed. He could leave right now, before things got worse, before he became another story no one finished. The dripping grew louder. Frustrated, Marcus kicked at one of the loose floorboards near the corner. It shifted slightly. He paused, then crouched down. The wood was rotted, weak. He pried it with numb fingers until it gave way with a dull crack. Beneath it, hidden in a shallow compartment, was a small metal box. Marcus stared at it for a second, his breathing slowing just a little. "You've got to be kidding me." He pulled it out. The metal was cold but intact. Inside, carefully wrapped, was a collection of old tokens, different sizes, different markings, all worn with age, and a letter. His chest tightened before he even opened it. He already knew. The handwriting was unmistakable. If you found this, it means you stayed. Marcus swallowed hard. I couldn't give you much. Not a perfect home, not an easy life, but I hoped I could give you something honest. His grip on the paper tightened. Real value is almost always hidden in places people ignore. If you understand that, you'll be okay. Marcus let out a slow breath, his eyes moving to the tokens. Then he noticed it, a small empty slot in the collection, same size, same shape as the token in his pocket. For a long moment he just sat there. The storm still raged outside. The roof still leaked. Nothing about his situation had magically changed. Except something had. This wasn't random, this wasn't luck, this had been left for him. Marcus pulled out the copper token and held it over the empty space. He didn't place it in, not yet. Instead, he leaned back against the cold wall, staring at the collection. If he sold all of these, he could get out, find a place, start over somewhere easier. But if he did that, this, whatever this was, would be gone. The last thing his grandfather had chosen for him. Marcus closed his eyes for a second, then nodded to himself. Not all of it, he said quietly. The decision settled in his chest. Firm, steady. He would use what he needed, but he wouldn't lose everything. That night he managed to get a fire going. Small, weak, flickering, but real. And for the first time since the storm began, Marcus didn't feel like he was just surviving. He felt like he had chosen to stay. The fire didn't change everything overnight, but it changed enough. A week passed, then another. Marcus worked through the cold with a kind of quiet, stubborn determination he didn't even realize he had. He patched the roof as best he could, reinforced the walls with salvaged wood, and figured out how to keep the fire going longer than a few hours at a time. It wasn't comfortable, but it was livable, and that was new. By the time early winter settled into something steady, the railway carriage didn't feel like a coffin anymore. It felt held together. The wind still howled outside, but inside there was the low crackle of fire, the faint smell of smoke, and something unfamiliar. Warmth that didn't disappear the second you stopped paying attention. Marcus mounted the copper token above the small stove he'd built, not as decoration but as a reminder. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he knew it mattered. The first person to show up was Sienna. She didn't knock, just pushed the door open like she expected it to be empty or like she didn't care if it wasn't. She stood there, shoulders tense, eyes sharp and watchful. Everything about her said she was ready to leave before anyone could tell her to. "You live here?" she asked, scanning the space. "Yeah," Marcus said, not moving. She stepped inside anyway. Sienna was the kind of person who had learned to survive by staying one step ahead of rejection. You could see it in how she talked, how she moved, how she didn't settle into anything. The first few days, she tested everything. Left doors open, took more food than she needed, made comments just to see if Marcus would react. He didn't. Not because he didn't notice, but because he did. The breaking point came when she knocked the frame holding the copper token off the wall. It hit the floor with a sharp crack. The sound cut through the room. Sienna froze for half a second, just long enough to show it wasn't an accident. Marcus walked over, picked it up, and checked the glass. Cracked, but the token was fine. He exhaled slowly. "If you want to stay," he said, calm but firm, "you don't have to break things to prove a point." Sienna didn't respond, but she didn't leave either. Devon showed up a few days later. He was quieter, younger, the kind of quiet that wasn't natural. It was chosen. He didn't speak, not once, just watched, stayed near the edges, slept lightly, flinched at sudden noises. Marcus didn't push, didn't ask questions Devon wasn't ready to answer. He just made space. Then one night, Devon disappeared. The door was open. The fire was still burning, but Devon was gone. Outside, the wind had picked up again, biting and sharp. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and went out. No shouting, no panic, just movement. step after step through the snow until he found him, curled up behind a fallen tree, trying to make himself small enough to disappear. Marcus didn't say anything. He just sat down next to him, waited. Minutes passed. Then slowly, Devon shifted closer. That was enough. By the time they walked back, the fire inside the railway carriage was still burning, and for the first time, it didn't feel like something Marcus had to fight to keep alive. It felt like something they were all starting to share. 2 years later, winter came back the same way it always did, quiet, heavy, and unapologetic. But inside the railway carriage, things were different. The fire burned steady, the walls held, the space felt lived in, not perfect but solid, real. Marcus stood near the stove, adjusting a piece of wood when there was a knock, 3 sharp taps, unfamiliar, uncertain. Sienna looked up immediately, her body tensing. Devon froze where he sat, eyes flicking toward the door. Marcus didn't move right away. Something about that knock felt familiar. When he opened the door, the cold rushed in first. Then he saw them. Mrs. Hartwell looked smaller than he remembered, tired. Her voice cracked as she spoke. We didn't know where else to go." Mr. Brennan stood behind her, quieter than ever. "We lost the house," he added. "Everything just fell apart." Snow clung to their coats. Their faces carried that same mix of pride and desperation Marcus had seen once before, only now it was heavier. Then it came. "We took you in," Mrs. Hartwell said, her tone shifting slightly. "We didn't have to." The words hung in the air. Sienna stepped forward, anger flashing across her face. Devon instinctively moved back, his shoulders tightening. The past had found its way inside. Marcus stayed still. He didn't react right away. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder, at the fire, at Sienna, at Devon, and finally at the copper token mounted above the stove. For a moment, everything went quiet. And then he understood. Letting them stay wouldn't just be kindness. It would be repeating something he had already survived. Marcus stepped forward and set a small bag in front of them. Food, a little cash, enough to get through the next few days. "This is what I can give," he said, calm and steady. Mrs. Hartwell frowned slightly. "That's it." Marcus met her eyes. "I don't owe you anything anymore." No anger, no bitterness, just truth. They hesitated, then slowly turned and walked back into the snow. This time Marcus didn't watch them for long. He closed the door. Click. The sound was firm, final, but not cruel. Inside, the fire kept burning. Sienna sat back down, still tense but quieter now. Devon relaxed just a little, his breathing steady again. And Marcus, he stood there for a second, then turned back to the warmth he had built, not given, built. So here's the question. If the people who once let you go showed up at your door, would you let them back in? Would you choose forgiveness or boundaries or both? If this story meant something to you, if it made you think or feel or remember something you didn't expect, hit subscribe and stay with us for more stories like this. Because sometimes the hardest thing you'll ever learn is not how to survive, but how to decide what you're willing to survive for.